Multiplication rules. When we multiply a negative to a negative, we get a positive answer. When we multiply a positive to a positive, we get a positive answer. When we multiply a negative to a positive, we will end up with a negative answer. So doing an example here. Now, a couple things I want to show you here is when you see a number attached to parentheses, it means that we're multiplying. So in this case, when I have a negative 2, parentheses negative 3, it means we're multiplying a negative 2 to a negative 3. So we don't see a multiplication symbol here, but because it's attached to the parentheses, it means it's being multiplied to it. So here we have a negative times a negative, so we're going to end up with a positive answer, and it's equal positive 6. Now in this case, I have 2 times 3. They're both positive numbers. When you multiply a positive to a positive, you get a positive answer. Now this last example, we have a negative 2, and it's attached to the parentheses 3. Well, that means I'm multiplying a negative 2 to 3, and a negative times a positive will give us a negative answer. Pause and try. So what you see here is a negative times a negative, so you're going to end up with a positive answer, and 9 times 3 is 27. Pause and try. So you have a negative times a positive, so you're going to end up with a negative answer, and 10 times 2 is 20. So it ends up being a negative 20. Now when you have an example here where you have a multi-step problem, you always want to work from left to right. So when you have a multi-step problem, you want to work from left to right. So the first thing I'm going to work with is just the negative 8 with that dot 2. That means it's being multiplied. So sometimes we see multiplication using parentheses. Sometimes we see it with the dot. So in this case, I have a negative 8 times positive 2. So I'm going to end up with a negative 16. And then I'm going to multiply it to that negative 3. So I have a negative 16 times a negative 3. Negative times a negative will give me a positive answer. So I end up with a positive 48. This next example, I'm going to work from left to right, and I see a negative times a negative, negative 3 times a negative 2 is going to give me a positive 6. And then I'm just going to bring down the next part of the multi-step problem. Then I'm going to do the 6 times that negative 5. 6 times a negative 5 is going to be a negative 30. And I'm going to bring down that 4. And then I'm going to do a negative 30 times a positive 4, a negative 120. So you want to make sure that you're doing it step by step so you get the right result with the right sign. Because if you don't have a negative 120 here, your answer would be wrong. Pause and try. So here you should have gotten a negative 15 times 2. Negative 15 times 2 is going to be a negative 30. Pause and try. So you end up getting a negative 2 times a negative 5 is positive 10. And then you're going to do the positive 10 times a negative 4 is going to give you a negative 40. Then you have a negative 40 times a negative 3, and it's going to end up being a positive 120. Pause and try. So this one, I want you to notice, you can do it from left to right, but you're multiplying inside there by a 0, so it's always going to end up being 0 when you multiply by 0. So the division rules for the assigned numbers is when you divide a negative by a negative, you get a positive. So in algebra, we're going to see division look like this, where you have a number over top of a number, and that line is indicating that you are dividing. So it looks like a fraction, but it's really a division problem, and fractions are division problems. So I have a negative divided by a negative will give me a positive answer. So in this case, when I have a negative 6 divided by a negative 2, I end up with a positive 3 as my answer. A positive divided by a positive will be a positive, just like with multiplication. But when you have a negative divided by a positive, you're going to get a negative. So whether you have a positive divided by a negative, you'll get a negative. In this case, I have positive 6 divided by a negative 2 will equal a negative 3. Or you could have a negative divided by a positive and you'll still get a negative. So if I had a negative 6 divided by a positive 2, I still end up getting a negative 3. So I want you to notice this example here. I have division, a negative 32 divided by a negative 4. So a negative divided by a negative will end up with a positive answer. So I end up getting it equal to a positive 8. This next one, I have a negative 25 being divided by a positive 5. So we'll end up with a negative 5 as my answer. Now, when you have a negative just on the outside of the problem, it means it's the opposite of whatever the answer would be. You could either put the negative with the top, you could put the negative with the bottom, but you're going to end up with just one negative. So when you have a negative divided by a positive, you're going to end up with a negative answer. So in this case, I end up with a negative 6 as my answer. So a key note with the division of numbers, the different ways that division is written. So you could see division like this, where you have A being divided by B, and if you have 0, B being divided into 0, where A is 0, you end up equaling 0. So keep in mind, when you divide a number into 0, it equals 0, because when you multiply by that 0, it will equal 0. So if I get B times 0, it equals 0. So when B is divided into 0, it will equal 0. Now when you have 0 dividing into a number, 0 dividing into A, you'll never find a solution that will work, because you cannot divide by 0. So when you're dividing by 0, your answer is undefined. You'll never find a solution that works. So the rule is you can never divide by 0. So note in this example, I have a negative 0 divided by 4. Well, you can divide a number into 0, because when you multiply by 0, you end up with 0, and it's going to equal 0. But you can't divide 0 into a number. 0 does not go into 2, so it's undefined. So when you're dividing by 0, it is undefined. Pause and try. You end up with a negative 5. Pause and try. Remember, I'm dividing 0 into a negative 1, so it's undefined. Pause and try. Now in this case, you see you have a negative and a negative. So really it's that double negative idea. And double negatives will always be a positive value. So it's positive 8. Pause and try. So in this case, you're going to end up with 0. You can divide a negative 2 into 0 times. Pause and try. So this is simply going to be a negative 1. Negative divided by a positive is a negative. So now I'm going to continue with the evaluation process. And when we talk about evaluation, you are taking the numbers that are given for the different variables and plugging it into the expression. And when you have variables that are attached to each other, it means that they are being multiplied together. So when I substitute in here a negative 2 into x and a positive 7 into y, it's going to look like this. They're being multiplied together. And then you do the multiplication process once you've substituted in the values into the variables. So we end up having a negative 2 times 7, which is going to result as a negative 14. You're also going to see a valuation that has division in it. So when we put the values for x and y into this expression, we're going to end up with a negative 24 divided by a negative 6. And when you divide a negative by a negative, you end up with a positive answer. Pause and try. So you see here, you end up with negative 1 times a negative 7. Negative times a negative will end up with be a positive. Pause and try. So you have a negative 5 being divided by 5. So you end up with a negative 1 as your solution. Pause and try. So this is a multi-step one where you need to multiply the first two together first. So a negative 2 times a negative 5 is going to be 10, positive 10. And then you multiply that to the last. So you end up with 90 as your answer. So now we're going to continue with word problems with integers. And when we're talking about multiplication, the clue words for multiplication would be times, multiplied by, twice, product. These are all words that mean we're going to be multiplying together, numbers together. Clue words for division would be quotient, divided by, goes into, or ratio. Okay, so now we're going to do an example. The temperature at Bar Harbor, Maine, was a negative 3 degrees Fahrenheit. It then dropped during the night to be 4 times as cold. What was the temperature then? So when we're talking about the degree here, we're told that it's negative 3 degrees out. And then we know overnight it dropped 4 times as cold. So in this case, I'm doing 4 times that negative 3 to find the value of the temperature. We end up with a negative 12 degrees. Pause and try. So in this case, the Dallas lost each game 6 games by 10 points. So to find that, you're taking 6 and multiplying it to a negative 10, and you end up with a negative 60 points. Pause and try. So this is a division problem when you want to find what it cost per day. So you're going to do division, and it's a positive divided by a positive, so you end up with a positive, and it was $60 per day. This next one is a combination problem. Temperature is currently at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature decreased 7 degrees every hour. If 2 hours passes, what is the new temperature? So in order to find the temperature, the new temperature, we're going to start off with the 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and knowing that it decreased 7 degrees every hour. So the first thing I want to find is, in 2 hours, what was the temperature it decreased by? So I do 2 times that negative 7 because it's going down. So we have 2 times a negative 7, so we're going to get a negative 14. I'm going to take that and I'm going to take it away from that 10 degrees that it currently is. So I end up getting a negative 4 degrees outside. Pause and try. So in this case, it's a negative 40 because she's paying the bill. 2 times a negative 40 is going to be a negative 80. And then you're going to take that away from the amount she has in her bank account. So she has a total of $70 left in her account.